Welcome to my channel. If you like this content, please subscribe. Hi everyone, and welcome to this discussion about how to get better at cueing your classes without relying heavily on demonstrating the poses. So today we're going to talk about how to cue tabletop position, and we're going to talk about how to effectively and efficiently cue so that your students can fully experience the pose without needing you to demonstrate it. So before we get started, my name is Nicole, and it's my mission to help yoga instructors get more confident in their teaching. So if you haven't checked out my website, you can click on the link below. It's nicolestaples.yoga, and it has information on when I'm doing my next interactive cueing workshop. It's going to be coming up soon. We'll be doing a free workshop on Monday, January, I believe it's January 27th. I'll double check the date. But then after that, we will be going into a month-long cueing workshop. You can hop in for the month every Monday, or you can just pop in for an individual class. Both are worth dropping into, but you'll get the full experience if you sign up for each week. So with that being said, you can also subscribe to my channel to get notified when my next video is. So let's start to get into it. So I wanted to just let you know, as a yoga teacher, cueing poses comes with practice, it comes with repetition, and it also comes with feedback. Sometimes we start teaching yoga and we are maybe a little unsure of our cueing and our sequencing, and that's the space that I wanted to create. So let's talk about what actually makes a good cue for a pose. So I use 4 different layers when I am working on learning to cue a pose for my class, and I'm going to break down those 4 layers for you. So I often say that the first 2 layers are where you want to stay, but you do want to get into this 3rd and 4th layer. And let me explain the layers so that you can understand understand where to start. So layer 1 I call the anatomical layer. So this is about what body parts form and the foundation. So we're talking about stacking joints and finding alignment. Our layer 2 is going to be our action and directional cues. So what the body is doing in the pose. So what's pressing, what's engaging, what's hugging in or rooting down. So let's use the first 2 layers in tabletop as an example. So you would say, come to all fours, hands and knees. Stack your wrist underneath your shoulders and knees underneath your hips. The tops of the feet will be flat on the floor. So we now have our anatomical, we're setting up the foundations of the pose. And then we're going to move into our layer 2, which is action and directional. So what is the body doing in the pose? What's moving, pressing, engaging, hugging in, and rooting down? So let's do the same thing with our 2nd layer. So you would spread your fingers wide, draw your belly in and up, which would be directional. Wrap the inside of your elbows forward. So now that we have those first 2 layers, we then can add a little bit more sensory cues to our pose. But I like to first get your foundations going, then add some action, and then we'll move into our next cue layer. So I would say something like, feel your ribcage hug in, or notice the weight of your shins pressing down towards the earth. Feel all 4 corners of your hands rooting into the floor as you slightly dome in your upper back. So there's a little bit of mixture of like direction in the sensory cues, but you're directing them to feel into their body, which changes the pose a little bit. It changes the experience of the pose. So now I will add the 4th layer, which I don't always add, but I think that it helps make that the pose feel a little bit more more engaging, and it adds a little bit more depth to the pose. So I call the fourth layer the imagery layer. And so when I add imagery, I will say something like, imagine an apple tucked under your chin to keep it from falling. So, or imagine a beam of light shining from your tailbone through the spine and out of the crown of your head. So my approach is to start instructionally and clearly, but then once you build trust and confidence in your students, especially newer ones, then you can add on the other two layers, which is the sensory and also the imagery. So before I give more examples, I want to point out that sensory and imagery cues are not just poetic. They're incredibly useful. Both of these types of cues, they stimulate creativity and then they engage the right brain. They can also activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which can reduce stress and anxiety. They also help with proprioception, knowing where your body is in space, and interoception, which is feeling ourselves from the inside out. So these cues really create anchor points for presence in the moment. So I wanted to also give you an example of a bad sensory cue, because sometimes if you say a cue that is sensory but it doesn't make sense, you might confuse your students. So one example, and this is just me throwing it out there, would be like, feel your eyes glide down your spine. So you can kind of like, you're telling your students or directing them to feel. However, they can't actually feel their eyes rolling down their spine. That's not a really good direction. They might take a moment and try and figure out what you're asking them to do. So we don't want to confuse our students with these really poetic, dreamy words just to say them because you think maybe you need to add something spectacular to your classes. You want to use cues that make sense, that help them get deeper into the pose. So if it's a sensory cue, you may want to say, feel your spine lengthening. They can actually feel their spine lengthening. It is like you're directing them, but you're directing them to feel something, so that's why you want to be very mindful of what you say in your classes, because you want each cue to deepen, instruct, and be clear. So I hope that makes sense. A better sensory alternative that you could use would be feel the back of your neck long. That would be a better one. Or notice the breath moving alongside the spine. Or feel the shoulder blades down your back. Those are all sensory poses that work because they reference actual sensations and they use real body parts as landmarks. So it's not that they have to figure out where things are. They already know. And they can anchor attention without really requiring imagination. So let's talk about bad imagery examples. So roll your heart open and slide it down the back of your body like a butterfly spreading its wings as it slowly descends to the ground. So that can be fun. It can be very poetic. It can be, if you're into writing or, being really creative, that can be fun to write, but it's also kind of confusing. You're kind of all over the place with, the butterfly and the spreading of the wings and descending down to the ground. It's just too many words. So a better alternative for that would be open your chest like a butterfly opening its wings. So you can kind of imagine it. It's not too long and it can give a direction to open, right? So that would be a good example. Another good example would be imagine a string pulling the crown of your head towards the sky. So that is you can imagine the lengthening of a string pulling you up. And so that is a cue that will help your students, like maybe more like visually get to what you're asking them to do. Another example would be shine your heart towards the front of the room. Again, you're opening, you're shining, you're kind of giving that visual cue so that they can imagine, and it creates this sense of creativity, and it turns their right brain on. So I like those kind of cues. In further workshops, we're going to talk about creating our own. Sometimes we can use what another teacher has said in a different class and say, oh, I like that, I'm gonna write that down, or and use it in your classes. But sometimes it's really fun to have the time to create your own and then get feedback. So we're going to do that in our workshops coming up. So again, you can check out the link below to sign up or find out more about those. So another reason why these imagery cues work are because they use single images. They're not like multiple images trying to get the student to like be like all over the place and maybe grasping for clarity. And they're visually intuitive, right? So when we ask our students to imagine the string pulling the crown of their head upwards, it's like they're visually showing or sharing what you're expecting them to do. And they actually create a map to actual movement. So it's like, I'm asking you to lift up, I'm actually asking you to open up. So it's like you're asking them to do something. So the keys to sensory and imagery are: the sensory helps the students feel, and imagery helps the students visualize. So both create memorable embodied experiences, but they also must support clarity and not replace it. So let's go and see if we can add all of these layers together to make the pose complete and get your students to get into the pose without actually needing you to demonstrate. And before I get into that, I wanted to say there's nothing wrong with demonstrating your classes, and there's nothing wrong with demonstrating the pose. I find that when I demonstrate a pose or verbally say the pose as I'm doing it, I can engage different parts of my body that I might not remember to vocalize when I'm doing a class vocally. But if you start by demonstrating while you're doing your own practice and talk about it out loud, then you can take your pen to your paper and be like, oh yeah, I want to make sure I remember to add that to my class, because I forget sometimes when I'm trying to just verbally cue it from thin air. So I do want to say that I do use my own practice to vocalize what I want to say in my classes so that I can help find a little bit more clarity and feel confident as a teacher. So in our workshop, we will be going over, I'm going to have you do lots of exercises where you can really get it down on paper so you know what you want to say. And I feel like embodying something and then transferring it to paper will help you remember. So we'll be doing that in the workshop, but let's move on to actually cueing the pose without needing to see it. So we'll start with layer 1, we'll move to layer 2, and then we'll do a little bit of add-on in layer 3 and layer 4. So maybe you want to close your eyes and see how you feel as I cue the pose. So come to all fours, hands and knees in your tabletop pose. Stack your wrists directly under your shoulders and your knees under your hips. Allow the tops of the feet to rest flat on the mat. Spread your fingers wide. Root down through all 10 fingertips. Draw your belly in and up. Wrap your inner elbows slightly forward. Press the shins down and gently dome through the upper back. So before we move on to our next layer, these 2 layers really set up the pose, and you could stop right there in your class. Everybody would understand what you're asking them to do, even beginners. But if you want to add a little bit more to find a little bit more uniqueness in your classes and make them stand out, you can add, feel the shoulder blades glide down the back. Notice how the hands and shins share the weight of the pose. Feeling the crown of your head reaching forward and the tailbone drawing back. So this layer, the sensory layer, gives your students proprioception and also embodiment. So then we can add our layer 4, our imagery 4, but it's not necessary, but I like to add them to my classes. So imagine your spine as long as a beam of light from the tailbone to the crown. Picture your ribs hugging in like a corset. Imagine your hands imprinting themselves on the mat. So take a moment and pause to just let that imagery land. And then you can close the moment of the pose by saying, take one breath here. Inhale to lengthen the spine and exhale to soften the jaw. So just to recap, layer 1 and layer 2 are there for you to provide clarity, safety, alignment, and confidence in your classes. And layer 3 and 4 are going to add embodiment, presence, subtlety, and artistry. So I wanted to let you know, as a teacher, if you stopped at layer 2, you're doing a great job. You are getting your students into the class, into the pose with safety and alignment. And if you wanted that extra, you can always add those sensory and imagery cues to make the pose come more alive and for your student to go a little bit deeper. So if you are interested in checking out my free workshop, I am starting the free workshop next Monday at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So that's January 26th. It's coming up. And then after that, we will be doing a 4-week workshop. So you can sign up for that. It's going to be Monday as well, February 2nd. And that's going to be at 6 p.m. So you can sign up. I'll have both links for the free workshop, and then I'll have the link for the 4-week. If you do take the free workshop and you want to sign up, you can, I'll have a link below in the email that I send you. You can subscribe if you want more information on when my next workshop is. And just to let you guys know that you can pop in to any one of the Monday classes in February. It would be beneficial if you take all 4. However, if you just want to like workshop for a couple hours on different poses, we'll be doing 4 poses per workshop. So you'll get a lot of benefit. But if you do sign up for the 4 weeks, then you'll have a full sequence by the end of the 4 weeks that you can bring to your classes, and you'll have worked out all of the different kinds of cues. So we'll do lots of fun things. I hope to see you if you're interested in that, and see you in the next one.